I call the Assistant Treasurer.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. In the absence of my good friend and colleague, the indefatigable Member for Dunkley, the Minister for Small Business, Bruce Bilson, it's left to me to tell the Chamber and the Australian people why this budget was a winner for them. This budget delivered on the government's promise to pay back Labor's debt and to lay the framework and the foundation for further growth and job creation in the Australian economy. It essentially had three key themes. The first theme was to support small business and jobs. And the fact that we were able to deliver a tax cut for 96% of all businesses in Australia, some 2 million businesses, was the reason why this budget was so well received. The fact is, if you were an incorporated business, you got 1.5% tax cut. If you were an unincorporated business, you got a discount of up to 5%, up to $1,000. And this was a great boost to the small businesses of Australia. And you got this accelerated depreciation of $20,000. And we saw car yards, cafes, restaurants, small businesses like the pubs and clubs, financial planners who are sitting in this room. We saw all those businesses in Australia benefit from the fact that we supported small business, and we cut red tape as well, which was also extremely significant. And a lot was due to the great work of my colleague who's now entered this place, the Member for Dunkley. The other key element in the small business and jobs package in this budget was the fact that we partnered with groups like the Brotherhood of St Lawrence in a $200 million+ program to help get people, particularly young people who are neither in work nor in education, an opportunity to get the skills to get in front of an employer. We had a work experience program where a person could work for up to 25 hours a week for 4 weeks and the employer would get supported. We had a program called Restart, where we've now accelerated the payment to the employer, where somebody on income support can get up to, the employer can get up to $10,000 to take on this worker over the age of 50. And that's because we recognise, particularly with an ageing population, how important it is to keep people in work and to get people in work. So that was the first theme, Mr Deputy Speaker. The second theme was about families and particularly childcare. A $3.5 billion package on top of the $5.5 billion for jobs and small business, 3.5, which is based on the work of the Productivity Commission, which is all designed to get more people into the workforce, particularly women. Because if we can get an increase in the number of women in our workforce to where Canada is, and let's say an extra 6 points, that's worth $25 billion to our economy. And then the third key theme was about the integrity of our tax system, and particularly going after those multinationals who may be engaged in transfer pricing and profit shifting. We've extended the GST to the importation of intangibles like the Netflix, but we've also strengthened Part 4A of the anti-avoidance provision of the Tax Act, and I think that is an important legacy. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we've also found money to go into national security because we have our people overseas fighting to support freedom and security around the world and also back here at home, an extra $1.2 billion. We found more than an extra $1 billion for PBS to go on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme for important anti-cancer drugs and the like. And we've done all of this while paying back Labor's debt. We inherited a budget deficit of $48 billion. We've got it down to $35 billion next year. 3 years' time it's $7 billion, and then it will eventually get into surplus. And the message is our debt will be $110 billion lower over the next decade than it will otherwise be under the Labor Party. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, this was a great budget, and the fact that small business has received such a big support, the fact that consumer confidence and business confidence is up, is due to the hard work of the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the Minister for Small Business and our entire back and front bench of the Coalition. Thank you.
I thank the Assistant Treasurer. The question is that the proposed expenditure be agreed to, and I call the member for Oxley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And my question is to the Assistant Treasurer. And can I ask the Assistant Treasurer what commitment the Prime Minister gave, or that he gave, to the Greens Party to secure their support for changes to the pension? And did this commitment by the government include a comprehensive review that considers all the components of the retirement income system, including tax and superannuation? And further, now that the Coalition has cut the pension by $2.4 billion, that will see single pensioners lose more than $8,000 a year, and will see 325,000 retirees lose some or all of their pension in 2017. Yet the Prime Minister has said, again just recently as yesterday, that the Coalition has no plans, not now or ever, to make any changes to superannuation. Why is it that this government is quite happy to take money from pensioners that have planned carefully for their retirement, whilst making no changes for wealthy Australians with significant accumulated superannuation savings?
I thank the member for Oxley, and I call the Assistant Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, what hide does the member for Oxley have asking that question? He's led with his chin, because the Labor Party has become irrelevant now in the negotiations to save the Australian taxpayer billions of dollars, Mr Deputy Speaker. We have reached an agreement with the Greens because the Labor Party refused to come to the table to negotiate an important reform to ensure the sustainability of the pension. And the fact is, all those questions you have asked are there for people plainly to see in the press releases, which make it very clear that we haven't reached an agreement which will ensure a saving to the taxpayer of $2.4 billion over the forward estimates. That's some 170,000 people on the pension, including, I'm sure, in the great electorates of those on this side of the House, an extra, on average, $30 a fortnight. An extra average $30 a fortnight. And I'd like to know, would the member for Chifley, would the member for Fraser, would the member for Oxley, member for Hotham, would they like to go to their members in their electorate who are on the pension and say to them they didn't even participate in a negotiation which would have led to an increase of $30 a fortnight in the pension? So just so you understand, 170,000 pensioners will now get on average an extra $30 a fortnight. Some 50,000 pensioners who are on the part pension will now get onto the full pension, and the Australian taxpayer will save $2.4 billion over the forward estimates. And the member for Cook, the Minister for Social Services, deserves a lot of credit for the way he has gone about negotiating this very practical and successful agreement with the Greens, because the Labor Party has decided to be a party of objection, a party of no ideas, and a party that has failed to come up with any of their own savings. Now, the key question that the member for Oxley raises is, what have we decided to do about superannuation? Well, the key answer to that is that we have said we have no plans to change the taxation concessions on superannuation, because we took to the Australian people a commitment at the last election to no adverse or unexpected changes to super. No unexpected and adverse changes to super. Now, I'm asked here by the member for Ford, my good friend the member for Ford, the beady killer, what was our commitment? And I said no adverse or unexpected changes to super. What was the Labor Party's commitment? Well, on the eve of the 2007 election, one Kevin Rudd stood up and told the Australian people that he wouldn't change superannuation one jot, one tittle. Well, what happened? What happened, the member for Ford knows all too well. What happened there was that the Labor Party introduced 12 adverse changes and it produced some $9 billion of additional taxes. And then the Labor Party was so ashamed of their position on super, that the member for McMahon, as the Treasurer of Australia, rushed out a press release in 2013 and said to the people of Canning and to the people of Ford and to the people of Dunkley and the people of Reid and the people of Lyons, and I've just met with the people of Reid, and I should all know it well, and the people for Reid and Monaro, and what they said, what Labor said in 2013 was, we will not make any changes to super for 5 years. Now that lasted all of 48 hours, but now we have the member for Fraser, who once called for the abolition of negative gearing. We have the member for McMahon, the shadow treasurer in this country. We have the member for Maribyrnong, the leader of the opposition, all saying they support 2 additional taxes on super, both on the contributions and on the earnings phase. And this will hit at least 425,000 Australians, and that's from the Parliamentary Budget Office. That's from the Parliamentary Budget Office, more than 2 times the estimates of the number of people affected, as said by the Labor Party. Now, the Labor Party has a budget black hole approaching $60 billion, measures they don't support, savings measures they don't support of ours in the Senate, extra additional spending measures of theirs. And what have they decided to do? They've decided to raid the hard-earned savings of ordinary Australians in superannuation. Shame on the Labor Party.
I thank the Assistant Treasurer. The question is that the proposed expenditure be agreed to, and I call the member for Reid.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the strange thing as a marginal federal member of this place is that you come to this place and you consider the macroeconomic picture, but when you go back to your electorate, you very much consider the microeconomic picture.
Exactly.
And it really is an unusual dichotomy, especially not coming from a political background, coming from a microeconomic family business background.
A good one.
And the exciting part, and through you, Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the people of Reid, I would like to pass on an unashamed message that they send. Thank you for the budget and the measures in it with relevance to small business. And in that vein, and to pass on a particular story, there's a club there at Drummoyne Rowers, and when I was growing up, had magnificent dollar drinks on Sunday afternoons. And you couldn't move in the place. And the club went broke some 15 or 20 years ago. It's been empty ever since. And a perennial sign, it's on Henley Marine Drive there, for lease. And I was driving by there about 3 weeks ago, and you just assume that it's going to still say for lease. And then they've put the sticker on, leased. And after years and years, I couldn't help myself. I looked up the agent's number and I rang the agent and I said, look, would you know, I introduced myself, would you know who has leased that place? And I said, look, I don't expect you to pass on their details to me, but would you please pass my details to that person? Within about 10 minutes, I get a phone call from a Mr. Pino Salerno. And Pino, as it turns out, Pino runs restaurants through other parts of Sydney. And he has leased that building. He had leased it just prior to the budget with a strategic plan to open it over the next 2 to 3 years in a staged way, and he ultimately hoped to employ around 30 local people. He then rang me back. I had made a friend, obviously, in Pino, after the budget. And he said to me, Craig, I want to thank you. Would you please pass on my thanks to the Minister? Because I'll tell you what I'm going to do. The changes you have made in the budget, instead of doing this in a staged way that will take 3 years, my partners and I have decided to accelerate the procedure and to bring it to a level where we will employ 30 local people, predominantly through hospitality, which is my background, local young people that are either studying for their degree or looking for a start in the industry. and every bit of equipment that he had planned out over the next 3 years to purchase in a measured fashion, the purchases have all been brought forward. That is the real difference. That's the coalface. That's the microeconomic impact of your measures, Minister, and our government's measures in this federal budget.
Tax reforms on these.
He did actually, funny, the Assistant Treasurer measures, and Deputy Speaker, you wouldn't be surprised to know he was actually a big fan of the tax cut as well. Remiss of me not to say that. But Minister, it's these sort of, and I could reel them off example after example. In the last 5 or 6 weeks, the feedback in the electorate of Reid. And I know I get this from my colleagues that tell me about their same anecdotes in Ford, Eden Monaro, Lyons. I'm sure the Assistant Treasurer has had his door beaten down, and all for good reasons. The feedback has been so overwhelmingly positive. And I know the Minister has been everywhere, all around the country, media commitments. His profile has raised through the roof. And I know he has answered this question, and I fear that I may be indeed risking asking him to do something today that he will do another 9 or 10 times. But that doesn't matter because I want to hear it. My question is simple, Minister. Would you tell the people of Reid what I'd like to know is how the package that we have in this budget for small business will improve the national economy and why the government's budget is so responsible?
I thank the member for Reid. For his question. I call the Small Business Minister.
Deputy Speaker, what a great example of what we're trying to achieve through this budget. We're about energising enterprise. That's what we're about. We know that personal endeavour and private enterprise paved the way for this country's greatness. It created living standards that are the envy of the world, and that's what we need to re-engage with and provide the right entrepreneurial ecosystem. So Pino Salerno, is that how I pronounce it? Salerno, Pino Salerno. A big shout out to Pino Salerno, and was it Henley Drive? Henley Marine Drive. What a great story. There was an economic asset floundering in the electorate of Reid, but with the energy and the perspicacity of the local member to know what's needed to turn that capacity into real action. What a great story. What a great story. And it is the story of what the government's trying to achieve. Yes, it is a world of delicious opportunities. I thank the member for Oxley and the goodwill and the fact that he's getting on the energised enterprise Kool-Aid. It's fantastic. It's fantastic to see you embracing the positivity that percolates through this side of the Parliament. The government, the coalition members, not only does positivity and optimism percolate through us, look at this team, a veritable boy band of private enterprise and entrepreneurship, where private endeavour, small business, family enterprise runs through their veins. And how could we not appreciate and embrace this story that is so much a part of so many of the Liberal and National Party members? I mean, these are our stories, and they are stories of Pino and others like Pino, who just want the opportunity to seize an economic potential and turn it into investment, into jobs. I mean, that's the story of how you grow economies. It's also the story of why small business policy is now in the heart of the Treasury portfolio. There was some conversation earlier about government's role, and your introduction, Member Farid, shows your great insight. It's not enough just to sit back and look at the macro numbers. You actually need to dig a little bit deeper. What is it that takes a person with a sparkle in their eye and a fire in their belly, an idea that they think might create economic opportunities for themselves and others, to actually go and follow through? That's what we need to do, get those conditions right. And I want to commend the work of Treasury and its officials who have really stepped up to involve themselves in that real-life decision-making process. What takes a person to go and mortgage their house, to have a go to create a business, to grow a business, to provide for a livelihood for themselves and others? That's what we need to understand. That's what good policy is all about. That is why this budget package has so hit the right spot, because we've done the work engaging with small businessmen and women, family and farming enterprises for years. not a revolving door of spokespeople like we saw under Labor, not where we saw 6 ministers in 6 years, 5 in 15 months. You couldn't even pick who it was. I won't embarrass the Labor minister at the time, but I was having a conversation with one of them and they couldn't even remember who their minister was. And I said, look, just wait for a little while and everyone will get a chance.
Who's it now?
Yeah, it was like everyone was going to get a chance.
Who's it now?
I'm not sure who it is. Hang on.
Come on,
Oh, no.
Dollar for anyone who knows who it is.
So what we've done
Assistant
is through
Treasurer
our
is not
package and
helping.
through one of the excellent pieces of communication and information that supported this budget, we've put out this document. And not only does it recognise that 96% of all businesses in Australia are small businesses supported by our package, not only does it recognise and pay respect to the 4.5 million livelihood opportunities that small businesses make possible in this economy. Not only it is a tribute to the $330 billion of economic activity, it says, what else can we do to take those ideas and turn them into economic action? So what's in this package? And in Pino's case, he's identified a couple of opportunities. We need to restore reward and incentive, and that's why the tax cuts for small business are so important. Now I know, well, it could be, tax cuts are coming, the jobs growth is happening and the economic conditions are improving, but we've got more work to do. We've got more work to do. But in this package, you'll see that tax cut, and I'd love to talk to you more about the specifics. A cut to the tax paid on small business incomes, not just incorporated small businesses, which seem to be the fixation of Labor, ignoring the 2/3 that aren't incorporated, the instant asset write-off, the encouragement for business formation and transformation in structures where that's necessary, accelerated depreciation for our primary industries. There's so much to talk about in this package, and having set the scene, I look forward to explaining it more and get some questions from those opposite.
Thank the Small Business Minister. The question is that the proposed expenditure be agreed to, and I call the member for Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I hope it might be possible to move this consideration in detail a little more away from argument towards accountability, a little more away from preaching and towards parliamentary responsiveness. And so I'd like to focus my question on the Assistant Treasurer and some issues relating to the goods and services tax. On Boxing Day of last year, Australians awoke to find the Assistant Treasurer splashed over the media, talking about his big plans to extend the GST to services like Netflix and to get rid of the low-value threshold exemption for overseas goods. As with many things the member for Kooyong does, it generated a little more heat than light. Such as, for example, the centrepiece of the member for Kooyong's first red tape repeal day, which was to include the scrapping of the ACNC, thankfully still up and running, and getting rid of the future of financial advice reforms, thankfully blocked by the Senate. Deputy Speaker, through you, question 1, does the member for Kooyong still believe, as he wrote in The Australian, that it is not fair to taxpayers or to retailers or their many employees to exempt overseas online retailers from the GST, even if some consumers are enjoying the ride?
Small business. 2,
is he still of the view that local Australian retailers are operating, quote, with one hand tied behind their backs because of the exemption for goods worth under $1,000? 3, if it is the case that the Assistant Treasurer still stands by these comments, why has he made no moves to actually do something about the low-value threshold in this year's budget? Turning to the budget measure and applying the GST to digital products and services, the exposure draft of the amending legislation doesn't give cause for concern. Question 4, can the government explain why I can purchase a DVD box set of MASH through Amazon and this would be exempt from the GST under the low-value threshold, but if I purchase those same 240 glorious MASH episodes on a digital format through Netflix, I will, under the government's proposal, pay GST on those? The government says it's for lower, fairer, simpler taxes. How does creating two kinds of tax treatment for essentially the same product meet that criteria? Turning now to the question of what imported services may look like. Question 5, will companies like Uber, Airbnb and Spinlister be covered by this measure? Deputy Speaker, now turning to the particular costings, unlike the government's multinational tax package, there are actual revenue estimates for this one. So I want to ask question 6, what assumptions were plugged into that costing to arrive at a revenue figure of $350 million over 4 years. What data or modelling is this based on? About the volume of goods and services currently being imported GST-free. 7, how many companies providing digital products and services are estimated to become GST liable as a result of this change? 8, did the Treasury or the government consult with significant international providers of digital products and services before introducing this measure? If so, which ones? 9, is the revenue estimate provided in the budget papers the same as the revenue estimate in the costing prepared by Treasury? 10, how will the government collect GST from the offshore companies which are captured by this measure? 11, what enforcement mechanisms will exist for offshore companies which fail to meet their GST obligations under the new measure? 12, what is the estimated GST compliance cost for the ATO in enforcing this measure? 13, why was the 1st of July 2017 chosen as the start date? And question 14, Minister, when will you finally see sense and back Labor's multinational tax package to properly crack down on multinational profit shifting, a package that would raise 60 times more revenue than the one that you announced in the budget?
I thank the member for Fraser for his questions, and I call the Assistant Treasurer.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I came here expecting a boxing match, the thriller in Manila here in the Federation Chamber. And what have I been hit with? A very wet sponge. A very wet sponge. I need the turn of phrase of the member for Dunkley, because this is a lettuce that I'd like to buy many times over, Mrs Deputy Speaker. Because I am so pleased that the member for Fraser has been reading my op-eds, because I've been reading his. I've been reading his, and I just want to share with you a couple of his. Well, I just want to read you. I want to read you the one from the Australian on the 27th of January this year. The 27th of January this year, and it was titled "In Defence of the Carbon and Mining Taxes." Stating that these two taxes, the budget would be comfortably back in surplus in 2017-18. Madam Speaker, the leader, the member for Fraser, the member for Fraser, the member. Madam Speaker. Sorry, Mr Deputy.
Assistant Treasurer composes himself. I will remind you, I am not Madam Speaker. I am the Deputy Speaker. Thank you.
Mr Deputy Speaker, so look, I have a long. I am pleased that the member for Fraser read my article about the GST, which I'll talk about one sec, but I've read his articles and he thinks with the carbon and mining tax, the budget will be back into surplus. That nearly was as good as Chris Bowen's. That was nearly as good as Chris Bowen's speech on the ABC Radio National when he said the government has returned the budget to surplus 3 years ahead of schedule and ahead of any other major advance economy. So, okay, seriously, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on the issue of the online threshold for the GST, as I wrote in my article in the Australian, and as I said on numerous times on radio,
can we just try and listen to the answer?
Australia is out of sync with the rest of the world as to where our threshold is. The fact that we have a $1,000 threshold compared to the United Kingdom, which has a £15 threshold, Canada, which has a $20 threshold, and the United States, which applies a GST to all the online purchases from overseas, or the VAT equivalent, means that I do believe that there is a need for reform in this area. Now, as the member for Fraser knows, both the Treasurer and the member for Dunkley, this Minister for Small Business, have also made similar comments. But with the GST, the money is going to the states, and all the states have to agree. And while premiers like Mike Baird have called very openly and publicly for a reduction in the threshold, while While Labor's own Treasurer in South Australia has called openly for a reduction threshold, while Lara Giddings, the former Labor Tasmanian Premier, has called openly for reduction in the threshold, and now we see the Labor government in Victoria being much more open to the idea. One of the governments that have been holding back is the Liberal government in Western Australia under Colin Barnett, because they rightly feel that at 30 cents in the GST dollar that they get is very much below what they deserve. But we are hopeful that the states could come to an agreement and that would be supported by the Labor opposition. And as you know, none of that money would go to the federal government, all that money would go to the state governments. And I think it would be good for jobs. I think it would be good for jobs in the retail sector, because if you buy something here on the high street under $1,000, there is a GST, but if you buy it from overseas, and it's under $1,000, it's not. So I am hopeful there is reform. I'm asked by the member for Fraser about multinational tax. Well, he should be ashamed of his own policy, because both the BCA and the Australian Chamber of Commerce have come out and slammed it and said it will cost jobs in Australia. As you know, we have lifted the resourcing of the international division of the ATO to higher than it ever was under the Labor Party to deal with this issue. We have changed to thin capitalisation rules, which are very strong, and the ATO Commissioner, Chris Jordan, is leading international efforts.
Minister, and the question is that the proposed expenditure be agreed to, and I call the member for Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Small Business, because I think it's very enlightening that those opposite who have this professed love of small business are yet to ask the Minister a question. But before I get to the question, I might make some observations and comments about how well this small business package has been received in the electorate of Ford.
I would ask the member to desist from interrupting the member asking the question.
I'm pleased to say that this small business package has been extraordinarily well received, and when we have a look at the components in this small business package, such as the instant asset write-off, the tax reduction for corporate small businesses and the tax rebate for those unincorporated entities, and as usual, a coalition policy covers the gambit of small business, whereas those opposite in the Leader of the Opposition's budget and reply speech forgot about 2/3 of small business. He only touched on the 1/3 that are incorporated. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we look at small business in this country, 96% of businesses in this country who employ 45% of our workforce, they're the ones that take the risk every single day to open their doors. They mortgage their house, they put their entire livelihood on the line every single day. We should be very proud of the fact that this government has taken the opportunity and the vision and the foresight to step out there onto their playing field and to support them in what they do, because they're the ones that have the capacity to grow and develop our economy for the future. And it's where the innovators and the entrepreneurs reside, in that small business sector that start off with one or two people in partnership, or maybe a single person with an idea, that over time from a home-based business they grow from that home office to a small office to a larger office and grow bigger and bigger as they grow. And they're the people that we should be looking to encourage and support. And it's not only this small business package that's in the budget, but it's also our employee share ownership measures to encourage those businesses as they grow to bring people into the business, and if they haven't got the capacity to pay them significant wages, they can give them an ownership share in the business, so they've got a genuine economic interest in the business in which they are now working. And again, what that does, Madam Deputy Speaker, is it builds the national wealth of this country. And it's not just through accumulating it in super, which is an extraordinarily important part of our national savings plan, and again, this government has been very positive in that regard, but more importantly, we look to other avenues of creating wealth through small business growth, employee share ownership. Equally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's important that this budget package not only looked after small business in the urban part of Australia, but equally we looked after and recognised the importance of small business more generally in the rural sector of our economy, because they also employ people in those rural communities. They produce tremendous wealth for this country that sometimes gets forgotten, and I think it's incredibly important that we focus on helping them as well, which we have done through this budget. So what we see, Madam Deputy Speaker, with this budget is a comprehensive plan for business in Australia across the broad spectrum of businesses. Frequently when we talk about small business, we think about the local bakery or cafe or mechanic, but equally we've got the rural supply shop out in our country towns, and the small licensed post office, or the small diesel fitter or mechanic out in those country areas as well. So I'm proud to say, been very well received in the electorate of Forde. And as we look forward to the introduction of these measures, can I ask the Minister please outline how the measures designed and articulated in the budget will help business in Forde but around the country as well?
I thank the member for Forde and I call the Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I thank the member for Forde at so many levels. He chairs the Coalition Backbench Policy Committee for Small Business. He's lived the life of small business. He's been advising and an advocate for small business all of his professional career. And guess what? He's still doing that in an exemplary way here in the nation's parliament. So I sincerely want to thank you, but also put on the record we are not twins. But there's been some suggestion of confusion there. But Member for Forde, thank you. The $5.5 billion jobs and small business package has a number of elements to it. We've spoken briefly about the small business company tax cut. That company tax cut for incorporated small businesses will see those small businesses attracting the lowest company tax rate in almost 50 years. It was 1967 was the last time the small business company tax rate was lower than what we are doing now, and that was when Sadie the cleaning lady was the #1 hit. So it's been a couple of generations since we've had that kind of incentive, but that's back. But we also know that 2/3 of small businesses aren't structured as companies, and we, unlike Labor, haven't forgotten about those enterprising men and women. So there's a 5% discount on their tax liability for turnovers under $2 million, up to $1,000 worth of benefit. Now, in proportionate terms, that's commensurate with the small business company tax cut, but what's significant is that captures the 2/3 of small businesses that aren't incorporated. They're your tradies, they're your self-employed, your sole traders, those operating through partnerships, and it is for each partner that's actively contributing in the business, so that's $1,000 for those active contributors, and also for those operating through trusts. So that's a great measure, a really terrific measure. But that's not all that's there. The asset write-off provisions. That's for a business-related asset purchase that would otherwise have to be depreciated through asset pooling arrangements and the like, or under Labor, or previously it was $1,000. That's been raised to $20,000, which was the message we were hearing. Put it at a level where there could be an investment in new productive capacity within those businesses. And it's been great to be to a number of electorates and to accompany great colleagues like the member for Eden Monero to hear firsthand how businesses are taking advantage of that. And I remember just Scott at the metal fabrication business talking about a new piece of metal fabrication equipment that he'll be buying that will boost his efficiency and help his business delight more customers in this Greater Canberra, Eden Monero region. So there's some of the examples. But the member for Forde moved into the primary industry sector. Now, they are, if small business is, and it is, the engine room of our economy, it's fair to say, though, that farmers are the heart of our identity. And we haven't forgotten about the great contribution nor the challenges that they face. 115,000 businesses report agriculture as their main business activity. There's a further 13,900 that report agriculture as a secondary activity for their enterprises, and we've recognised and celebrated that in the budget. Not only are they entitled to access the broader small business and jobs package benefits, but there's particular measures for primary producers. What we've said from budget night, those capital expenditures on water facilities and fencing will be expensible in the year in which they were incurred. And that includes this financial year. That includes this financial year because that measure takes effect from budget night. In the area of food and fodder storage assets, very important as rural producers contend with drought and the variety in the climate that they contend with for their businesses. Having water storage infrastructure and investment important to their sustainability of their business, but also in the area of fodder storage and food for livestock. That's ordinarily depreciable over about 30 years. That will be accelerated, so it's a 3-year depreciation. So they're key parts of the package. But beyond that, we've also recognised that just as the population is ageing, the ownership profile of small business is also changing. I celebrate that more women than blokes are starting small businesses right now. I'm thrilled about that, and it shows you the entrepreneurship of women and their preparedness to take their ideas and insights and turn it into economic opportunities. For home-based and micro businesses, in some cases juggling those dual priorities in their life of family and economic security, being self-employed and an entrepreneur is a great step forward. Using the new technology, that's another part of it. But also looking at the ageing and succession planning. In here, we are ensuring that when a business doesn't change ownership but has to change its structure to better respond to its future ambitions and needs, that doesn't trigger a capital gains tax event. Now, that's very important in our primary industries. We look to the future and want to support that next generation of primary producers.
I thank the Minister.